The Atlanta airport buzzed with its usual chaos as Staff Sergeant Alicia Thompson walked through the terminal, her camouflage uniform standing out among the sea of casual travelers. Her shoulders felt lighter than they had in months, despite the weight of her backpack. After 6 long months in Afghanistan, she was finally heading home. Alicia checked her boarding pass again, a small smile forming at the corner of her lips. First class. It wasn't something she'd paid for. The airline had a policy of occasionally upgrading active military personnel when seats were available, and today was her lucky day. After sleeping on cots and in tents for half a year, the thought of a comfortable seat with extra legroom felt like the ultimate luxury. Now boarding first-class passengers for Flight 1427 to Dallas, the gate agent announced, her voice barely audible over the terminal noise. Alicia joined the short line, standing behind a couple in matching Hawaiian shirts and a woman in a crisp business suit. When her turn came, she handed over her boarding pass and ID. "Thank you for your service," the gate agent said, a phrase Alicia had heard countless times but still appreciated. "Enjoy your flight, Sergeant Thompson." The jet bridge stretched before her as she made her way onto the plane, the familiar smell of recycled air greeting her. Flight attendants stood at attention near the entrance, offering warm welcomes and directing passengers. Alicia showed her boarding pass to a flight attendant with a name tag reading Diane. "Seat 3A is by the window on your left," Diane said, gesturing toward the front of the plane. Alicia nodded in thanks and made her way down the aisle. First class looked exactly as she'd imagined. Wider seats, more space, small glasses of water already placed on the armrests. She found 3A and placed her backpack in the overhead compartment, keeping only a worn paperback novel to read during the flight. As she settled into her seat, feeling the plush leather against her back, Alicia closed her eyes for a moment. Just 3 more hours and she'd be home. She could almost smell her mom's famous pot roast cooking in the oven, could almost feel her dad's bear hug that would surely lift her off her feet. Her peaceful moment was interrupted by a throat clearing. Alicia opened her eyes to see a man in an expensive-looking suit standing in the aisle, staring down at her with furrowed brows. "I think you're in my seat," he said, not quite making eye contact with her as he held out his boarding pass. Alicia reached for her own pass in the pocket of her uniform. "I'm in 3A, she said, keeping her voice even as she double-checked the seat number. "That's impossible," the man said, his voice rising slightly. "I always book 3A. I'm a platinum member." By now, a small line had formed behind the man as other passengers waited to reach their seats. Alicia looked at her boarding pass again, then held it up for him to see. "It definitely says 3A right here, sir." The man, who appeared to be in his mid-50s with graying hair at his temples and a watch that probably cost more than Alicia made in a month, glanced at her pass dismissively. There must be some mistake. Diane, the flight attendant, noticed the holdup and approached them. "Is there a problem?" "This seat is mine," the man said, handing Diane his boarding pass. "I'm Robert Keller. I fly this route twice a month and I always sit in 3A. Diane looked at Robert's boarding pass, then at Alicia's. Her expression changed to one of polite firmness. "Mr. Keller, your boarding pass is for 3B, the aisle seat. This is Sergeant Thompson's seat." Robert's face flushed slightly. "That's not possible. Check again." With practiced patience, Diane looked at both passes once more. "I'm sorry for the confusion, Mr. Keller, but 3A is definitely Sergeant Thompson's assigned seat. 3B is right here." She pointed to the empty seat, next to Alicia. Instead of moving to his assigned seat, Robert remained standing, his jaw set. He looked at Alicia, then at her uniform, then back at her face. "Is this some kind of special treatment thing?" he asked, his voice low enough that only Alicia and Diane could hear. "Excuse me?" Diane asked, her professional smile faltering for just a moment. "I just find it interesting that suddenly my seat is given away when I've been a loyal customer for years," Robert continued, still not moving. "I mean, no offense, but does someone like her really need to be in first class?" The cabin seemed to go quiet, though Alicia knew it was probably just the blood rushing in her ears. She'd faced worse during her deployments, much worse, but something about the man's dismissive tone made her stomach clench. "Sir?" Diane said, her voice taking on an edge. Sergeant Thompson has a valid boarding pass for this seat. Whether she received an upgrade or purchased the ticket herself is not relevant. This is her assigned seat. Other passengers were watching now, some with open curiosity, others pretending to be occupied with their phones or magazines but clearly listening. "I understand that," Robert said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "I'm simply questioning the airline's policy of bumping paying premium customers in favor of other arrangements." Alicia had remained quiet, years of military discipline helping her keep her composure, but now she spoke. "Sir, I'm happy to switch seats if it's that important to you." Her voice was calm, controlled. Robert seemed momentarily taken aback by her offer, perhaps expecting an argument. Before he could respond, another passenger spoke up from a few rows back. "For heaven's sake, man, she's a soldier. Take your assigned seat and be grateful she's willing to defend your right to complain about it." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. Robert's face reddened further, this time with embarrassment rather than anger. "I wasn't—" he started, then stopped. "That's not what I meant." Diane stepped in smoothly. "Mr. Keller, your seat is 3B. Please take your seat so we can continue boarding." For a moment it seemed like Robert might continue arguing, but the weight of disapproving stares from other passengers seemed to finally register. With a curt nod, he sat down in 3B, immediately pulling out his phone and becoming intensely focused on the screen. The boarding process resumed, but Alicia could feel tension radiating from the man beside her. She opened her book, trying to lose herself in the story, but the words blurred on the page. 6 months in a war zone, and somehow this was what made her uncomfortable. As other passengers filed past, a few nodded to her or whispered quick thanks for her service. An elderly man gave her a formal salute as he passed, which made her smile despite herself. The minutes ticked by as the plane filled. Robert hadn't spoken another word, or even acknowledged her presence since sitting down. Alicia tried to relax, reminding herself that soon she'd be home, surrounded by people who loved her, eating real food, sleeping in a real bed. Just as the flight attendants were preparing to close the doors, Alicia noticed Robert shifting in his seat, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. She braced herself for another comment but kept her gaze fixed on her book. "Look," he finally said, his voice lowered so others couldn't hear. "I didn't mean to imply anything back there. It's just been a long day and I'm very particular about my travel routines." Alicia turned to look at him, taking in his uncomfortable expression. It wasn't quite an apology, but it seemed to be the closest thing she'd get. She could hold a grudge or she could try to make the next 3 hours less awkward. Military life had taught her that sometimes peace was worth more than being right. "I understand routines," she said simply. "No hard feelings." Robert nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. He opened his mouth as if to say something else, but the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing their imminent departure. As the plane began to push back from the gate, Alicia gazed out the window at the airport workers on the tarmac. In a few hours, she'd be home. This uncomfortable moment would be nothing more than a strange footnote in the story of her return. What Alicia didn't know was that this encounter was far from over. In fact, it was just the beginning of something neither she nor Robert could possibly anticipate. The plane hadn't even reached cruising altitude when Alicia realized the uneasy truce between her and Robert wasn't going to last. As the flight attendants prepared for beverage service, he pulled down his tray table with unnecessary force, the plastic slapping loudly against the seat rests. "First time in first class?" he asked, not looking at her directly but instead straightening his silverware with meticulous precision. Alicia turned from the window. "Yes, actually. It was an unexpected upgrade." Robert made a small sound in the back of his throat that might have been acknowledgement. "They do that sometimes. Public relations move, I suppose." The implication hung in the air, that she was some kind of charity case, a token gesture for the airline to feel good about itself. Alicia had faced far worse during her military career, but something about this man's casual dismissal of her worth stung in a unique way. Diane approached with a warm smile. "Can I get either of you something to drink before takeoff?" We have champagne, wine, or any soft drinks you might prefer. Sparkling. Water with lime, Robert answered immediately. No ice. Of course, Mr. Keller. And for you, Sergeant Thompson? Alicia considered for a moment. Just water is fine, thank you. Are you sure? Diane's smile grew wider. First-class perks include free drinks. Might as well enjoy them. In that case, maybe an orange juice, Alicia amended, returning the smile. As Diane moved to the galley to prepare their drinks, Robert shifted in his seat. You know, these upgrades create problems for frequent flyers, he said, his voice conversational but with an undercurrent of annoyance. Those of us who actually pay for these seats rely on consistent service. Alicia kept her expression neutral. I understand. That perspective. I didn't ask for the upgrade, though. The gate agent just offered it. Of course they did, Robert muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Diane returned with their drinks, setting them carefully on their tray tables. We'll be taking off shortly, and then I'll come back to take your lunch orders. As she walked away, Alicia took a sip of her orange juice, savoring the sweet tanginess. She'd gone months without fresh fruit juice, making do with powdered mixes and the occasional canned version. Small pleasures like this were what she'd missed most during deployment. The plane began its taxi toward the runway, the engines rumbling beneath them. Alicia watched through the window as ground grew smaller, the familiar stomach drop of takeoff momentarily distracting her from her uncomfortable seatmate. Once they reached cruising altitude, Diane returned with menu cards. Today we're offering either herb-crusted chicken with roasted vegetables or beef tenderloin with mashed potatoes. Both come with a side salad and your choice of dessert. I'll have the beef rare, Robert said without looking at the menu. And the chocolate cake. For dessert. Diane nodded and turned to Alicia. And for you, Sergeant? The chicken sounds wonderful, Alicia said, genuinely excited at the prospect of a hot meal that didn't come from a military mess hall. Excellent choices, Diane said. I'll bring those out shortly. In the meantime, can I get either of you a refill? After Diane left to attend to other passengers, an awkward silence settled between Alicia and Robert. He had pulled out a laptop and was typing furiously, occasionally pausing to take a sip of his sparkling water. Alicia returned to her book, though she found it hard to concentrate. The tension radiating from the man beside her was palpable, like static electricity before a storm. 20 minutes later, Diane returned with their meals, setting down white cloth napkins and real silverware. The aroma of freshly cooked food made Alicia's mouth water instantly. Enjoy, Diane said, placing the tray in front of Alicia with a flourish. And thank you again for your service. Robert's jaw tightened visibly at those words. As Diane moved away, he turned to Alicia. You must get tired of hearing that. Alicia cut a piece of chicken, considering her response. It's always nice to be appreciated. It just seems performative, Robert continued, slicing into his beef. People say it automatically now, like they're checking a box on their good citizen list. Maybe, Alicia conceded. But I'd rather live in a country where people acknowledge service members than one where they don't. Robert took a bite of his food, chewing thoughtfully. Fair point. What branch are you in? Army, combat medic. Something flickered across Robert's face. Surprise, perhaps. That sounds intense. It can be, Alicia said simply, not wanting to elaborate on the horrors she'd witnessed, the lives she'd tried to save. Sometimes successfully, sometimes not. My father was in Vietnam, Robert offered unexpectedly. Never talked about it, not once. This small personal detail changed something in the air between them, humanizing what had been a cold exchange. Alicia nodded. A lot of veterans don't. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the background hum of the engines and quiet conversations from other passengers filling the space between them. Alicia was halfway through her meal when the plane hit a patch of turbulence, jostling everyone, slightly. Robert's water spilled across his tray, droplets landing on his expensive suit pants. He cursed under his breath, reaching for his napkin. Without thinking, Alicia handed him her unused cocktail napkin. Here. He took it with a nod of thanks, dabbing at the moisture on his clothes. 300 flights, and I still manage to wear half my drink every time there's turbulence. The small joke, self-deprecating and unexpectedly human coming from him, made Alicia smile. Hazard of flying, I guess. You'd think they could design a cup that doesn't spill, Robert grumbled, but without the edge his voice had carried earlier. As they finished their meals, the atmosphere between them had shifted from hostile to merely reserved. Robert had closed his laptop and was now flipping through the in-flight magazine, occasionally glancing at his watch. Diane returned to collect their trays. How was everything? Excellent, Alicia said sincerely. Best meal I've had in months. Passable, was Robert's assessment, though he'd cleaned his plate completely. Diane began stacking their dishes. We'll be landing in about an hour and a half. Can I get either of you anything else in the meantime? I'm fine, thank you, Alicia said. Robert shook his head, already reaching for his laptop again. After Diane left, Alicia excused herself to use the restroom. As she walked down the aisle, she noticed a young man in uniform, a private based on his insignia, seated in economy class, wedged between two larger passengers, looking uncomfortable. Something about his posture, the barely concealed discomfort of being pressed between strangers while wearing a uniform that already made him stand out, stirred something in Alicia. She'd been that young soldier once, navigating civilian spaces while carrying the weight of military service. When she returned to her seat, Robert was engaged in what appeared to be an intense email, his brow furrowed in concentration. Alicia sat down quietly, trying not to disturb him, but her mind was working through an idea that had taken root during her brief walk through the plane. After a few minutes of internal debate, she pressed the call button. Diane appeared promptly. Everything all right, Sergeant Thompson? Yes, Alicia said, but I was wondering if I could speak with the flight manager before we start our descent. Robert glanced up from his laptop, curiosity momentarily overtaking his indifference. Of course, Diane said, though she looked slightly puzzled. May I ask what this is regarding? I'd just like to discuss something about seating arrangements, Alicia said, keeping her voice neutral. I'll get the manager for you right away, Diane promised before moving toward the front of the plane. Robert closed his laptop slowly. Problem with your seat after all? His tone suggested he might be pleased to have his original complaint validated. Not exactly, Alicia replied, looking straight ahead. A few minutes later, a woman in a slightly different uniform approached their row. Her name tag read, Patricia Reynolds, Flight Manager. Sergeant Thompson? I understand you wanted to speak. With me. Yes, Alicia said, unclicking her seatbelt and standing up in the narrow space. Could we speak privately for a moment? Patricia nodded. Of course. We can talk near the galley. As Alicia followed the flight manager, she could feel Robert's eyes on her back, likely wondering what she was up to. The truth was, Alicia herself wasn't entirely sure if what she was about to propose made sense, but something deep within her, the same instinct that had guided her through chaos on the battlefield, told her this was the right thing to. In the small area near the front galley, Patricia turned to face her. How can I help you, Sergeant? Alicia took a deep breath. The decision she was about to make might seem small in the grand scheme of things, but somehow, in this moment, it felt significant. Like many choices in her life, this one wasn't just about her, it was about something bigger. I'd like to discuss switching seats with someone, she began, watching the flight manager's expression shift from polite interest to genuine attention. But I have a specific request about how it's handled. Patricia listened carefully as Alicia outlined her idea. By the time she finished explaining, the flight manager's professional demeanor had softened into something like admiration. That's not a request we get every day, Patricia said finally. But I think we can make it happen. Are you absolutely sure about this? Alicia nodded, feeling a certainty that had been missing since she'd first encountered Robert. Yes, I'm sure. Then I'll make the arrangements, Patricia said. We'll announce it in about 15 minutes before we begin our descent. Thank you, Alicia said simply, As she walked back to her seat, she caught Robert watching her approach with undisguised curiosity. She sat down without explanation, focusing once again on her book, though the words blurred before her eyes as she contemplated what would happen next. The next 15 minutes passed slowly, the atmosphere between Alicia and Robert charged with unasked questions. Finally, Patricia's voice came over the intercom system. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your flight manager speaking. Before we begin our descent into Dallas, we have a special announcement to make." Alicia closed her book and placed it in the seat pocket in front of her, steeling herself for what was to come. Patricia's voice continued through the cabin speakers. "One of our passengers, Staff Sergeant Alicia Thompson, has made an unusual request that I'd like to share with all of you." At the mention of her name, Alicia felt the eyes of nearby passengers turn toward her. She kept her gaze forward, her hands folded calmly in her lap, though her heart beat a little faster. "Sergeant Thompson has offered to give up her first-class seat," Patricia announced, but with a special condition attached to her offer. Robert shifted in his seat beside her, his expression a mixture of confusion and something that looked almost like guilt. His eye darted to her face, then away again. "Sergeant Thompson has requested that the monetary difference between her first-class seat and an economy seat be donated by the airline to the Wounded Warrior Project, an organization that supports injured service members." A murmur spread through the cabin as passengers processed this information. Alicia could feel the plane humming beneath her, a steady vibration that matched her own internal tension. "As a company that values the service and sacrifice of our military personnel," Patricia continued, "we are honored to accept Sergeant Thompson's proposal and will be making this donation in her name." Alicia finally allowed herself to look around the cabin. Several passengers were watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to open admiration. An elderly couple across the aisle exchanged whispers behind their hands, nodding in her direction. Furthermore, Patricia's voice took on a warmer tone. "Sergeant Thompson has asked if any other passengers would be interested in matching this donation. Of course, this is entirely voluntary." Robert went completely still beside her, his knuckles whitening where they gripped the armrest between them. Alicia hadn't specifically named him in her request to Patricia, but the implication was clear enough, especially to him. For anyone interested in contributing, Patricia concluded, flight attendants will be passing through the cabin with information on how to donate. Thank you for your attention, and we will begin our descent to Dallas in approximately 20 minutes. As the announcement ended, the cabin erupted in a buzz of conversation. Diane approached their row, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Sergeant Thompson, we've arranged for Private Wilson from economy class to take your seat for the remainder of the flight. He's making his way up now." Alicia nodded, gathering her book and the small personal items she'd removed during the flight. As she stood, Robert finally found his voice. "Wait," he said, his tone lacking the edge it had carried earlier. "This isn't necessary." Alicia paused, looking down at him. "It's already arranged." "But—" Robert seemed to struggle with his words, an unusual circumstance for someone who clearly prided himself on being in control. "I was out of line earlier. You don't need to give up your seat." "This isn't about you, Mr. Keller," Alicia said quietly, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "It's about making something good come from an uncomfortable situation." Before Robert could respond, a young man in uniform appeared at the end of their row. He couldn't have been more than 20, with a fresh face that still carried traces of adolescence despite the military bearing he was clearly trying to maintain. "Private Wilson?" Diane gestured to Alicia's seat. "Sergeant Thompson has offered to swap seats with you for the remainder of the flight." The young soldier looked bewildered. "Ma'am, I don't understand." "You will," Alicia said with a small smile, stepping into the aisle to let him pass. "Enjoy the chicken if they still have it." As Private Wilson slipped past her, his expression a mixture of confusion and delight, Alicia noticed Robert watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of understanding. "Mr. Keller," Diane said, her professional demeanor firmly in place, though her eyes sparkled with something like satisfaction. "Sergeant Thompson has suggested you might be interested in making a matching donation to the Wounded Warrior Project." Put on the spot, with dozens of passengers now watching to see how he would respond, Robert cleared his throat. "Of course," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet cabin. "In fact, I'd like to triple the donation amount." A smattering of applause broke out among the passengers who had been following the drama unfold. Alicia, already moving toward economy class, paused momentarily at this unexpected response. She gave a small nod in Robert's direction, acknowledgement, not gratitude, before continuing down the aisle. The economy section felt immediately different. Closer, quarters, more noise, the smell of too many people in too small a space. Alicia made her way to Private Wilson's former seat, squeezing past a large man who barely shifted to let her through. "You're the soldier from the announcement," the woman in the middle seat said as Alicia settled in. "Why would you give up a first-class seat?" "I've been trying to get an upgrade for years," Alicia smiled politely. "Sometimes there are more important things than comfortable seats." "Still," the woman persisted, "it seems like a waste. You earned that seat." "The donation will help veterans who need support," Alicia explained simply. "That's worth more to me than extra legroom for a 3-hour flight." The woman seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. "My nephew served in Iraq, came back different. These organizations do good work." "They do," Alicia agreed, grateful for the woman's understanding. "They helped several friends of mine when they returned with injuries." As the conversation died down, Alicia leaned her head against the window, watching clouds drift past. The cramped economy seat was a stark contrast to the spacious first-class accommodation she'd left behind. But there was something almost comforting about being back, among ordinary travelers, away from the tension that had surrounded her interaction with Robert. Her thoughts were interrupted by a flight attendant, not Diane, but a younger woman named Rachel, according to her name tag, who appeared in the aisle with a tablet in hand. "Sergeant Thompson?" Rachel bent down slightly to speak over the background noise of the cabin. "Mr. Keller asked me to give you this." She handed Alicia the tablet, which displayed what appeared to be a donation confirmation page. The amount listed made Alicia's eyes widen slightly. Not triple the cost difference as Robert had stated, but 10 times that amount. "He also asked me to give you his business card," Rachel continued, producing a crisp white card from her pocket. "He said you should contact him if you'd like to discuss the donation further." Alicia took the card, noting the embossed logo of a major investment firm and Robert's title, Senior Vice President. "Thank you," she said, handing the tablet back to Rachel. As the flight attendant moved away, Alicia studied the business card more closely. On the back, written in a precise hand, was a brief note. "I was wrong. Thank you for the lesson in grace. RK." The gesture was unexpected, and Alicia found herself smiling slightly. People were complicated. She knew that better than most. On the battlefield, she'd seen ordinary men and women rise to extraordinary heights of courage and compassion. She'd also seen how fear and stress could transform decent people into something less than their best selves. Robert's initial behavior had been disappointing, but his response to her challenge suggested there might be more to him than first appeared. Over the next half hour, as the plane began its descent toward Dallas, several passengers stopped by. Alicia's row. Some wanted to thank her for her service, others to express admiration for her donation idea. A businessman 3 rows ahead insisted on giving her his card as well, mentioning that his company was always looking to hire veterans. The woman beside Alicia watched these interactions with growing interest. "You're quite the celebrity now," she observed as an elderly gentleman returned to his seat after shaking Alicia's hand enthusiastically. "Not what I intended," Alicia admitted. "I just wanted something positive to come from an awkward situation." "Well, you've certainly accomplished that," the woman said. "And taught that first-class fellow a lesson in humility, too, from the looks of it." Alicia glanced toward the front of the plane, though she couldn't see into the first-class cabin from her position. "That wasn't really my goal either." "Maybe not," the woman conceded. But sometimes people need to be reminded of what really matters. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. My nephew, the one I mentioned who served in Iraq, he benefits from the Wounded Warrior Project. I'm going to make a donation too. That's very kind, Alicia said, genuinely touched. It's the least I can do, the woman replied, her fingers moving across her phone screen. Brian, my nephew, he lost his right leg below the knee. These organizations helped him find purpose again, got him into adaptive sports, connected him with other veterans. He's even planning to compete in the Paralympics next year. As the woman continued sharing her nephew's story, Alicia felt a wave of satisfaction wash over her. This was exactly why she'd made her proposal, not to embarrass Robert or to be recognized for her generosity, but to create a ripple effect of support for those who needed it most. The plane's descent became more pronounced, the pressure changing in the cabin as they dropped through layers of clouds toward Dallas. Alicia's ears popped painfully, a reminder of the lingering effects of explosions she'd been too close to during her deployments. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, the captain's voice announced over the intercom. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival. As the announcement continued with standard landing information, Alicia found herself wondering what would happen when they reached the gate. Would Robert avoid her? Seek her out to explain himself further? The note on his card suggested he felt some remorse for his behavior, but people often made promises in moments of public pressure that they had no intention of keeping once the spotlight moved elsewhere. The thought had barely formed when Rachel Ape paired again, leaning into their row. Sergeant Thompson, the captain, has requested that you remain seated after we land until all other passengers have deplaned. Alicia's brow furrowed in confusion. Is there a problem? Not at all, Rachel assured her with a smile. Quite the opposite, in fact. But I'm not supposed to say more than that. This mysterious request only added to Alicia's curiosity about what awaited her in Dallas. As the plane touched down with a slight bump, then gradually decelerated along the runway, she found herself mentally preparing for whatever might come next. The woman beside her raised an eyebrow. Sounds like you've started something bigger than you planned. Story of my life, Alicia replied with a small laugh. During her military career, she'd learned that the smallest actions could sometimes have the most significant consequences, both on the battlefield and off. As the plane taxied toward the gate, passengers began the familiar routine of gathering belongings, checking phones that had been in airplane mode, preparing for the rush to exit despite repeated announcements to remain seated until the seatbelt sign was turned off. When they finally reached the gate, and the distinctive chime indicated they could unbuckle, Alicia remained seated as instructed while others stood and retrieved items from overhead bins. She watched as a steady stream of passengers moved toward the exit, many nodding or smiling in her direction as they passed. To her surprise, Private Wilson appeared at her row, his posture straight as he paused in the aisle. Sergeant Thompson, I wanted to thank you personally. I didn't understand at first, but the flight attendants explained what happened. No thanks necessary, Private, Alicia replied. How was first class? A boyish grin spread across the young soldier's face. Amazing, ma'am. They gave me extra dessert. Good, Alicia said, returning his smile. Safe travels. As Private Wilson continued toward the exit, Alicia noticed Robert waiting near the front of the economy section, allowing other passengers to pass while he stood with his expensive leather briefcase clutched in one hand. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded cabin, and he gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod before turning to exit the plane. Eventually, the flow of departing passengers thinned to a trickle, then stopped entirely. Alicia remained in her seat, curious about why she'd been asked to stay behind. Rachel approached, accompanied by Patricia, the flight manager. Sergeant Thompson, Patricia said warmly, if you'll come with us, there's someone who would like to meet you. Intrigued, Alicia gathered her belongings and followed the two women toward the front of the now empty plane. As they approached the exit, she could see a small group of people waiting in the jet bridge, airline personnel based on their uniforms, along with a man in a suit who stood slightly apart from the others. Patricia turned to her with a smile just before they reached the door. It seems your actions today caught the attention of our regional director. He happened to be at the airport and asked to meet you personally. Alicia hadn't expected this level of attention. She'd made her proposal thinking only of the immediate situation, the uncomfortable dynamic with Robert, the young soldier crammed in economy, the opportunity to support a cause she believed in. She hadn't considered how her actions might be viewed by others or what consequences might follow. As she stepped into the jet bridge, the man in the suit stepped forward, hand extended. Sergeant Thompson, I'm David Chen, Regional Director for Southwest Airlines. I'd like to talk to you about an idea your actions have inspired. The airport terminal buzzed with the usual chaos of arrivals and departures as Alicia made her way toward baggage claim. Her conversation with David Chen, the airline's regional director, had been brief but impactful. He'd been impressed by her initiative and wanted to discuss implementing a formal program where passengers could donate their upgrades to military personnel with a matching donation component similar to what she had proposed. We'll be in touch, he had promised, handing her his card. What you did today, it's exactly the kind of spirit we want to encourage. Alicia had accepted his card with a polite nod, though the attention made her somewhat uncomfortable. She hadn't started this to gain recognition or launch a corporate initiative. She'd simply been trying to make something positive out of an unpleasant encounter. As she rode the escalator down to baggage claim, Alicia scanned the crowd for her sister who was supposed to pick her up. Instead, her eyes landed on a familiar figure, Robert Keller, standing somewhat awkwardly near a coffee shop, his briefcase at his feet and 2 cups in his hands. For a moment, Alicia considered pretending she hadn't seen him. Their interaction on the plane had reached a natural conclusion, and she had no real desire to revisit the tension of those first uncomfortable exchanges. But before she could decide on a course of action, Robert looked up and their eyes met across the terminal. With a small sigh, Alicia adjusted her path to intercept him. Better to face this now than wonder later what he might have wanted to say. Sergeant Thompson, Robert greeted her, extending one of the coffee cups. I thought you might want this after all the excitement. Alicia accepted the cup cautiously. Thank you, Mr. Keller. Robert, please. He gestured to a nearby bench. Do you have a moment? Alicia checked her watch. Her sister had texted that she was running late. Typical Katie, always behind schedule. A few minutes, yes. They sat down side by side, an arm's length apart, both staring straight ahead as travelers rushed past with luggage and children in tow. I owe you an apology, Robert said finally, breaking the silence between them. My behavior on the plane was inexcusable. Alicia took a sip of the coffee, black, no sugar, exactly how she preferred it. She wondered if that was a coincidence, or if he'd been paying more attention than she realized. Apology accepted, she said simply. There was no point in drawing this out or making him grovel. Life was too short for grudges, a lesson she'd learned repeatedly during her deployments. Robert seemed surprised by her easy acceptance. That's it? No lecture about privilege or respect or how I should know better? A small smile tugged at the corner of Alicia's mouth. Would it make you feel better if I berated you? Maybe, he admitted, a hint of self-deprecation in his voice. I deserve it. Look, Alicia turned slightly to face him. I don't know what kind of day you were having or what pressures you're under. We all have moments we're not proud of. What matters is how we respond when we realize we've messed up. Robert studied her face for a moment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? He hesitated, clearly choosing his words carefully. Someone more, I don't know, combative maybe. The military has a reputation for toughness. We're trained to recognize which battles are worth fighting, Alicia replied, and to conserve energy for the ones that matter. Robert nodded slowly, digesting this. The donation went through, by the way. I called my assistant from the plane to make sure it was processed immediately. I saw the confirmation. That was very generous. It was the least I could do, Robert said, staring down at his coffee cup. My father. He struggled after Vietnam. Back then there weren't organizations like Wounded Warrior Project. He dealt with it all alone. This personal revelation caught Alicia by surprise. On the plane, Robert had mentioned his father's service only in passing, with no hint of the deeper story behind it. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said. "It's still hard for a lot of veterans, but at least there are more resources now." "He drank himself to death," Robert continued, his voice matter-of-fact, though Alicia could detect the pain beneath the words. "By the time I was old enough to understand what he'd been through, it was too late to help him." The conversation had taken an unexpected turn, shifting from a simple apology to something much more personal. Alicia wasn't sure how to respond. In her work as a combat medic, she'd become accustomed to people sharing their darkest moments. Pain, fear, grief. But this was different somehow. "Is that why you reacted so strongly to my upgrade?" she asked, understanding beginning to dawn. "Because of your father?" Robert's mouth twisted in a grimace. "Partly, and partly because I'm just an entitled jerk sometimes. Success does that to people if they're not careful, makes them think they deserve special treatment." "At least you're self-aware," Alicia said, a hint of humor in her voice. "Getting there," Robert acknowledged with a small smile of his own. "Your little stunt on the plane certainly helped with that." They sat in more comfortable silence for a moment, watching the airport bustle around them. A family reunion was taking place nearby. Tearful hugs and excited chatter as an elderly couple greeted what appeared to be grandchildren they hadn't seen in some time. "Where are you headed now?" Robert asked, following her gaze to the happy family. "My sister's picking me up. Going home to my parents' place for a few weeks before I report for my next assignment." "And where's that?" "Fort Sam Houston," Alicia said. "I'm starting an advanced medical training program." Robert looked impressed. "You're a doctor?" "Combat medic," she corrected. "But I'm working toward becoming a physician assistant. The Army is putting me through the program." "That's admirable," Robert said, and it sounded like he meant it. "Saving lives on and off the battlefield." Alicia shrugged, slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "It's just what I'm good at. We all find our way to contribute. Some of us more directly than others," Robert said. "The most meaningful thing I did today was write a check." "Don't underestimate that," Alicia countered. "Those donations make real differences in people's lives." The woman who sat next to me in economy, her nephew lost his leg in Iraq. He's training for the Paralympics now, partly because of programs funded by organizations like Wounded Warrior. Robert nodded thoughtfully. Still, there's something about direct service that feels more authentic. "It's not a competition," Alicia said gently. "We need all kinds of contributions." A notification chimed on her phone. A text from Katie saying she was 5 minutes away. Alicia finished the last of her coffee and stood up, adjusting her backpack on her shoulder. "I should go. My sister's almost here." Robert stood as well, extending his hand. "Thank you for taking the time to talk. And for handling everything the way you did. It would have been easy to just make me the villain of the story." Alicia shook his hand firmly. "People are rarely all villain or all hero. Most of us are just doing our best with what we know at the time." "Wise words," Robert said, releasing her hand. "Though I suspect you've seen more extremes of human behavior than most." "You could say that," Alicia acknowledged, memories of both extraordinary courage and terrible cruelty flashing through her mind. "But I've also seen how quickly people can change when given the chance." "Like me?" Robert asked with a wry smile. "Time will tell," Alicia replied, returning the smile. "One coffee and a donation doesn't necessarily indicate permanent transformation." Robert laughed, a genuine sound that softened the lines of his face and made him seem younger somehow. "Fair enough. I'll have to prove it over time." "How would you do that?" Alicia asked, genuinely curious. Robert considered the question seriously. "I'm not sure yet, but I think it starts with paying more attention to the people around me and the assumptions I make about them." Before Alicia could respond, her phone chimed again. Katie had arrived and was waiting in the pickup area. "I have to go," she said, gesturing toward the exit. "Good luck with your transformation." "Wait." Robert reached into his pocket and pulled out another business card, similar to the one he'd sent to her on the plane, but with different contact information. "This has my personal number on the back. If you ever need anything, career advice, connections in the medical field, or just someone to buy you coffee and apologize again, I'd like to stay in touch." Alicia hesitated, then accepted the card. "I make no promises, but thank you." As she walked away, Alicia slipped the card into her pocket, reflecting on the unexpected turns this journey had taken. What had started as an unpleasant encounter had somehow evolved into something more complex. Not quite friendship, but a meaningful connection nonetheless. Outside, the Texas heat hit her like a wall as Alicia scanned the pickup lanes for her sister's blue sedan. She spotted Katie waving frantically from the driver's seat and headed in her direction, a smile breaking across her face at the sight of her younger sister's familiar enthusiasm. "Alicia!" Katie squealed as she jumped out of the car to envelop her in a hug. "Finally! I thought this deployment would never end." Alicia returned the hug tightly, breathing in her sister's familiar scent, something fruity and sweet that had remained constant since their teenage years. "Missed you too, Katie Cat." "Mom's going crazy with the welcome home preparations," Katie said, taking Alicia's backpack and tossing it into the back seat. "Dad keeps telling her to tone it down, but you know how she gets. The whole neighborhood's probably coming over tomorrow." Alicia groaned good-naturedly as she slid into the passenger seat. Please tell me she didn't hang the "Welcome Home" hero banner again. "Oh, she absolutely did," Katie confirmed with a laugh as she pulled away from the curb. "Plus a new one that says 'Our daughter saves lives.' It's massive. You can probably see it from space." Despite her mock complaints, Alicia felt a warmth spread through her chest at the thought of her mother's enthusiastic welcome. After months of sand, stress, and the metallic smell of blood, her parents' modest suburban home with its overly decorated front yard sounded like paradise. "So," Katie said, glancing at her sister as they merged onto the highway. "Standard flight? Anything interesting happen?" Alicia considered the question, weighing how much to share about the day's events. "Not standard, no. Actually, something pretty unusual happened." Katie perked up immediately, always eager for a story. "Spill it. Did you meet someone famous? Witness an air rage incident? Get proposed to by a lonely businessman?" "Nothing quite that dramatic," Alicia said with a laugh. "But there was this guy in first class." As they drove through the familiar landscape of their hometown, Alicia recounted the events of the flight, her upgrade, Robert's initial rudeness, her decision to give up the seat and request the donation. With each detail, Katie's expressions ranged from outrage to pride to amazement. "So then the regional director wants to talk about making it a regular program," Alicia concluded as they turned onto their parents' street. "And just now at the airport, the guy actually sought me out to apologize in person." "Wait." Katie slowed the car, her eyebrows shooting up. "Mr. Entitled Jerk tracked you down to say sorry? And bought you coffee?" "Seems he had a change of heart," Alicia said, downplaying the significance. "People can surprise you." "I'll say," Katie muttered, pulling into their parents' driveway. "So what was he like once you got past the jerk exterior?" "Cute?" "Katie," Alicia scolded, though there was no real irritation behind it. "He's at least 15 years older than me, and that's not the point of the story." "Just asking," Katie said innocently as she parked the car. "You haven't dated anyone since that disaster with Ryan 2 years ago. Age gap relationships are totally acceptable these days." "I'm not looking for a relationship," Alicia reminded her as they got out of the car. "I'm focused on my career right now. The PA program is going to be intense." Katie retrieved Alicia's backpack from the back seat. "All work and no play makes Alicia a dull soldier. You can't save lives 24/7, sis." Before Alicia could form a retort, the front door of the house burst open and their mother appeared, arms outstretched and tears already streaming down her face. "My baby's home!" she cried, rushing toward them with surprising speed for a woman. In her 60s, Alicia found herself enveloped in her mother's embrace, the familiar scent of her lavender perfume bringing a lump to her throat. For a moment, everything else faded away. The flight, Robert, the donation, the airport conversation, as she simply allowed herself to be her mother's daughter again, home and safe. "Let her breathe, Elena," her father's voice called from the doorway, his tone gruff but eyes suspiciously bright as he waited his turn. As her mother reluctantly released her, Alicia caught sight of the enormous banner stretched across the front of the house. "Welcome home, our hero," in red, white, and blue letters. Beside it, just as Katie had warned, hung a second banner, "Our daughter saves lives." "Mom," Alicia groaned, though she was smiling, "the neighbors are going to think I'm an egomaniac." "Let them," her mother said firmly, linking arms with her as they walked toward the house. "I'm proud of my daughter, and the whole world should know it." Her father wrapped her in a bear hug when she reached him, lifting her slightly off her feet, just as she'd predicted he would. "Good to have you back, kiddo," he murmured against her hair. "Good to be back, Dad," Alicia replied, feeling the solid strength of him, a constant in her life that had anchored her through deployments and danger. As they all moved inside, the familiar smells of home cooking enveloping her, Alicia felt the tension of the past months and the past hours finally begin to ebb. Whatever came next, whether it was her medical training program or possible changes to airline policies or even an unlikely connection with a formerly rude businessman, she would face it the way she faced everything, one step at a time, with determination and grace. Katie nudged her as they entered the living room, which had been decorated with yet more welcome home signs, and a table laden with Alicia's favorite foods. "So," she whispered conspiratorially, "did Mr. Reformed jerk give you his number?" "Katie," Alicia warned, even as her hand unconsciously touched the business card in her pocket. "That's a yes," Katie declared triumphantly. "I knew it." Their mother turned, catching the tail end of the exchange. "What's a yes? Did something happen on your flight, honey?" Alicia shot her sister a warning look before turning to her mother with a small smile. "It's a long story, Mom. Let's eat first, and then I'll tell you all about it." "Oh, Elena's going to love this," her father chuckled, leading the way toward the dining room. "Our daughter starts changing airline policies and making businessmen rethink their lives before she even gets home. That's my girl." As her family moved ahead of her, chattering excitedly about having her home, Alicia paused in the entryway of her childhood home. She thought about the events of the day, how a moment of discomfort had led to unexpected connections and possibilities. In her experience, that was often how life worked. The most meaningful paths frequently began with the most challenging steps. With a small smile, she joined her family at the table, ready to share her story and to listen to theirs. The everyday details of home that had sustained her through the darkest moments of her deployment. Tomorrow would bring new chawl, Angus, but for now, she was exactly where she needed to be. 2 weeks after Alicia's return home, she sat at her parents' kitchen table, sipping coffee and scrolling through her emails. The morning light streamed through the window, casting a warm glow on the worn wooden surface. In the backyard, her father was tending to his vegetable garden, a hobby he'd taken up after retirement that seemed to bring him endless satisfaction. Her peaceful morning routine was interrupted by Katie, bursting into the kitchen still in pajamas despite the late hour, her tablet clutched in her hands. "Have you seen this?" Katie demanded, sliding the tablet across the table. Alicia caught it before it collided with her coffee mug. "Seen what?" "You're internet famous," Katie declared, pointing at the screen. "Look." Alicia looked down at the tablet and felt a jolt of surprise. The headline read, "Soldier's simple act of kindness sparks chain reaction." Below it was a blurry photo that someone had clearly taken on the plane, Alicia standing in the aisle, speaking with the flight manager. The article beneath detailed the events of the flight, though with several embellishments that made Alicia cringe slightly. "Where did this come from?" she asked, scrolling through the article with growing discomfort. "It's everywhere," Katie said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. "Someone on your flight posted about it on social media, and it went viral. This is just one of dozens of articles. You're trending, sis. Alicia set the tablet down, unsure how to feel about this development. She'd never sought attention for her service or her actions. In fact, she'd always been more comfortable working quietly behind the scenes, doing what needed to be done without recognition. Great, she muttered, taking a sip of her now lukewarm coffee. Katie studied her sister's face. Most people would be thrilled about this. It's all positive. You're being called humble, inspiring, a true example of service. What's the problem? Alicia struggled to articulate her discomfort. It was a private moment. Something between me and that guy, Robert. And now it's being turned into some kind of viral inspiration story with details that aren't even accurate. Welcome to the internet age, Katie said with a shrug. But look, there's more. She took the tablet back and tapped on another article. The airline is actually implementing the program you suggested. They're calling it Seats for Service. Passengers can donate their upgrades to military personnel, and the airline will make a matching donation to veterans organizations. This news was more welcome. That's actually great, Alicia admitted. If something good comes out of this, I guess I can handle a little unwanted attention. A little? Katie raised an eyebrow. Check your phone. I bet it's blowing up right now. Alicia reached for her phone, which she'd left on silent during breakfast. Sure enough, there were dozens of notifications. Messages from friends and fellow service members who had seen the articles, emails from people she hadn't spoken to in years, and even a few interview requests from local news stations. This is too much, she muttered, setting the phone face down on the table. Oh, it gets better, Katie said with a mischievous grin. Guess who gave an interview about the incident? Alicia's stomach tightened. Please don't say Robert. Robert, Katie confirmed, tapping on yet another article. And he's surprisingly eloquent about what a life-changing moment it was for him. Listen to this. Sergeant Thompson's actions made me reevaluate not just how I behave in public, but how I view my responsibility to the community. It was a powerful lesson in humility and service. Alicia couldn't help but laugh despite her discomfort. He's laying it on a bit thick, isn't he? Maybe, Katie conceded. But he also announced that his investment firm is launching a new program to hire veterans, with a special focus on those with medical training. They're committing significant resources to help military medical personnel transition to civilian healthcare careers. This caught Alicia's attention. Really? That's substantial. Seems like you made quite an impression on Mr. Entitled Jerk, Katie said, wiggling her eyebrows suggestively. Alicia rolled her eyes. It's not like that. He felt guilty and is trying to make amends in a public way. Good for him, I guess. Her phone buzzed again, and Alicia reluctantly picked it up. This time it was a text from an unfamiliar number. Assuming you've seen the news by now, sorry about the attention, can we talk? Robert, Katie, who had been reading over her shoulder, squealed. He texted you. I knew he gave you his number. It's not romantic, Alicia insisted, though she felt a strange flutter that she immediately tried to suppress. He probably wants to coordinate our stories or something. Or something, Katie echoed with a knowing smile. Are you going to respond? Before Alicia could answer, their mother entered the kitchen, already dressed for the day and carrying a bundle of mail. More letters for you, sweetheart, she said, placing them on the table in front of Alicia. And there's a package too. I left it in the living room. It was too heavy to carry. More letters? Alicia asked in confusion. From whom? All sorts of people, her mother replied, moving to the coffee pot to pour herself a cup. Ever since that article came out a few days ago, you've been getting mail from all over. Veterans, children, teachers. Everyone's very impressed with what you did. Alicia looked at Katie accusingly. A few days ago? You knew about this and didn't tell me? Katie had the grace to look slightly abashed. I thought you knew. And then when you didn't mention it, I figured you were just being your usual humble self and didn't want to talk about it. I had no idea, Alicia said, picking up one of the envelopes. It was addressed simply to Sergeant Alicia Thompson with her parents' address below. How did people even find out where to send these? Small town, her mother reminded her. Everyone knows the Thompson family on Maple Street has a daughter in the military. Once your name was in the news, it wasn't hard to connect the dots, Alicia opened the letter, reading quickly. It was from a fourth-grade teacher in Oklahoma, explaining that her class had read about Alicia's actions and wanted to send their thanks. Attached were colorful drawings and notes from the students, many featuring stick figures in military uniforms standing next to airplanes. Despite her discomfort with the attention, Alicia found herself smiling at the children's artwork. "This is actually pretty sweet," she admitted. "There's more where that came from," her mother said, sitting down at the table with them. "Your father set up a special shelf in the living room for all the letters. We've been reading them each evening. Some of them are quite moving." Alicia's phone buzzed again, another message from Robert. "I understand if you want nothing to do with this media circus, but my offer to fund veteran medical training is genuine. Would value your input on how to structure the program." "Mom, did you see the article about the airline implementing a program based on what Alicia did?" Katie asked, deftly changing the subject while Alicia considered Robert's message. As her mother and sister chatted about the news coverage, Alicia typed a quick response. "Free to talk this afternoon around 3. This attention is unexpected." His reply came almost immediately. "Tell me about it. My PR team is thrilled, but I wasn't looking for publicity either. 3 works. I'll call you." Earth to Alicia, Katie's voice broke through her thoughts. "Mom asked if you want to see the package that came for you." "Oh, sorry. Yes, I suppose I should open it." In the living room, Alicia found a large box waiting on the coffee table. Behind it, just as her mother had mentioned, her father had set up a display shelf that was already half filled with colorful envelopes and small tokens, challenge coins, ribbons, even a few handmade bracelets. "This is overwhelming," Alicia murmured as she approached the box. The return address was from the Wounded Warrior Project headquarters. Curious, Alicia opened the package to find a framed certificate of appreciation, a letter from the organization's director, and a substantial bundle of printed emails. The letter explained that following the news coverage of Alicia's actions, the organization had received a surge in donations, over $175,000 in just 1 week, with many donors specifically citing her story as their inspiration. The printed emails were from veterans and their families who had benefited from the organization's programs and wanted to express their gratitude for the unexpected influx of support. Alicia sat down heavily on the couch, the bundle of emails in her lap. This is a lot to process. Her father, who had come in from the garden, sat down beside her. "You did a good thing, kiddo. People are responding to that. But I didn't do it for this." She gestured at the letters, the shelf, the certificate. "I just wanted to make something positive out of an awkward moment." "That's exactly why people are responding," her father said gently. "You weren't trying to be a hero or go viral or whatever they call it these days. You just did what felt right, in the moment, without any expectation of recognition. That's the kind of authenticity people are hungry for." Alicia leaned against her father's shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence as she had since childhood. "I don't know what to do with all this attention." "You don't have to do anything," he assured her. "It will die down eventually. But in the meantime, maybe consider that your small act has created a ripple effect that's helping a lot of people." "Your father's right," her mother added, joining them in the living room. The unwanted attention. "A little?" Katie raised an eyebrow. "Check your phone. I bet it's blowing up right now." "For this," she gestured at the letters, the shelf, the certificate. "I just wanted to make something positive out of an awkward moment." "That's exactly why people are responding," her father said gently. "You weren't trying to be a hero or go viral or whatever they call it these days. You just did what felt right in the moment without any expectation of recognition. That's the kind of authenticity people are hungry for." Alicia leaned against her father's shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence as she had since childhood. "I don't know what to do with all this attention." "You don't have to do anything," he assured her. It will die down eventually. But in the meantime, maybe consider that your small act has created a ripple effect that's helping a lot of people. Your father's right, her mother added, joining them in the living room. That donation amount could fund physical therapy for dozens of wounded veterans or mental health services or career transition programs. Put in those terms, Alicia found it easier to accept the attention. If her moment of discomfort on the plane had somehow translated into tangible support for fellow service members, perhaps it was worth the temporary discomfort of being in the spotlight. I guess you're right, she conceded. And the airline program could have real benefits for military personnel traveling home from deployments. Plus, Katie chimed in, unable to resist, your businessman friend seems to be using his resources for good now. That's not nothing. He's not my friend, Alicia protested automatically, though with less conviction than before. But yes, if his company follows through on the veteran hiring initiative, that could make a meaningful difference. The conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Alicia's mother went to answer it, returning moments later with a puzzled expression and a large bouquet of flowers. These just arrived for you, she told Alicia. The card just says, thank you for the lesson, RKA. Katie's eyebrows shot up to her hairline. Not romantic, huh? Sending flowers doesn't automatically make it romantic, Alicia insisted, though. She felt a blush creeping up her neck. It's just a gesture. A gesture with roses and lilies, her mother observed, setting the arrangement on the coffee table. Very tasteful. Expensive, too, from the looks of it. Alicia's father, sensing her discomfort, stood up. Let's give Alicia some space. She's got a lot to process, and we're not helping with all the teasing. Grateful for her father's understanding, Alicia gave him a small smile. Thanks, Dad. As her family dispersed, her father back to his garden, her mother to the kitchen, and Katie upstairs after one final knowing look, Alicia found herself alone with the flowers, the certificate, and the stack of grateful messages from veterans. It was strange how one moment on a plane had cascaded into all of this, and stranger still that the person she'd initially pegged as an entitled, inconsiderate businessman had apparently undergone a genuine change of heart. Or at least he was making choices that suggested as much. At 3 o'clock, Alicia sat on the back porch swing, away from her family's curious ears, and answered Robert's call. Sergeant Thompson. His voice came through clearly, formal but with a warmth that hadn't been present during their first encounter. Mr. Keller, she replied, matching his tone. Or should I call you the reformed executive, as one article described you? He laughed, a genuine sound that surprised her. Please don't. The media coverage has been excessive. You can say that again, Alicia agreed. I've got a living room full of letters and artwork from elementary school children who apparently think I'm some kind of superhero. In their defense, what you did took courage, Robert said. It would have been easier to just endure my rudeness in silence or escalate into a confrontation. I've faced worse than a grumpy businessman, Alicia reminded him. I have no doubt, he acknowledged. Which brings me to the reason for my call. The veteran hiring initiative I mentioned in that interview. It's real. My board approved it yesterday. We're committing $20 million over 5 years to recruit, train, and support veterans transitioning to civilian careers, with a special focus on those with medical experience. Alicia was momentarily speechless. That's substantial. It's the right thing to do, Robert said simply, and I'd like your input on how to structure the program. What barriers veterans face when entering the civilian workforce, what support services would be most valuable, that sort of thing. I'm flattered, but I'm not an expert on veteran employment programs, Alicia pointed out. I'm still active duty myself. True, Robert conceded. But you have perspective that I lack, and connections within the military community. You could help ensure we're addressing real needs rather than just what looks good in a press release. The proposition was intriguing. Alicia had seen firsthand how difficult the transition to civilian life could be for many of her fellow service members. The opportunity to shape a program that might ease that transition was tempting. I'm starting my PA training program in 3 weeks, she said after a moment of consideration. I won't have much free time. I understand, Robert replied. Even occasional input would be valuable. Perhaps a monthly call? We could work around your schedule. Alicia found herself warming to the idea. I might be able to manage that, and I could connect you with some veterans advocacy groups that have more expertise in this area. That would be extremely helpful, Robert said, the relief evident in his voice. Thank you. A comfortable silence fell between them, a marked contrast to the tense atmosphere of their first meeting. The flowers were unnecessary, Alicia said finally, but thank you. They're beautiful. It seemed inadequate given the circumstances, Robert admitted. But I wanted to acknowledge the impact of what you did. Not just on the public or the charity, but on me personally. And what impact was that? Alicia asked, curious despite herself. Robert was quiet for a moment. It made me realize how easily we can become disconnected from the humanity of others when we're focused on our own concerns. I've built my career on paying attention to details that others miss. But somehow I'd missed the most important details, the people right in front of me. The honesty in his voice was unexpected. Alicia found herself wondering about the man behind the expensive suit and initially dismissive attitude. That's a valuable realization. One I should have come to long before a stranger had to teach it to me on a plane, Robert said ruefully. But I'm grateful nevertheless. Another silence, companionable rather than awkward. So, Robert continued, his tone lightening. When does your training program begin? And where is it located? Fort Sam Houston, Alicia replied. In San Antonio. It starts on the 15th. San Antonio, Robert repeated. My firm has an office there, actually. I visit quarterly for oversight meetings. Is that so? Alicia said, unable to keep a small smile from her voice. It is, he confirmed. Perhaps when I'm in town for my next meeting, we could discuss the veteran program in person. Over dinner, maybe. The invitation hung in the air, its potential meanings layered beneath the professional veneer. Alicia found herself at a crossroads. She could interpret his offer strictly as a business discussion, or acknowledge the subtle shift that had occurred between them over the course of their limited interactions. I'd like that, she said finally, deciding that some paths were worth exploring regardless of their unexpected beginnings. Send me the dates when you know them. I will, Robert promised. And Alicia, for what it's worth, I'm sorry our first meeting was so unpleasant, but I'm not sorry it happened. Sometimes we need to be shaken out of our complacency. Sometimes we do, she agreed. I'll talk to you soon, Robert. After ending the call, Alicia remained on the porch swing, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across her father's garden. In 3 weeks, she would begin the next chapter of her career, taking another step toward her goal of becoming a physician assistant. And now, unexpectedly, she had a role in shaping a program that could help countless veterans navigate their own transitions. Life rarely followed a predictable path. As a soldier, Alicia had learned to adapt to changing circumstances, to find opportunity in chaos, to make the best of difficult situations. Her encounter with Robert on the plane had been unpleasant in the moment, but it had set in motion a chain of events that now held promise not just for her, but for many others. The doorbell rang again, and Alicia heard Katie call from inside the house. Alicia, Channel 7 News is here. They want to interview you about the airline program. With a small sigh and a shake,